Welcome to today's reading. I hope you can hear me a little bit better. I got a nifty mic here that's supposed to help, so we'll see how that goes. Today I'm going to do a reading from Three Fortunes for the Billionaire. I really love Ezreal. He is a quiet, self-assuming guy. He was bullied when he was a kid. Because he stuttered, which of course does what? It makes you stutter worse. So when I was doing research for this particular book, I was surprised at the number of quite famous people who stutter. I mean, a lot of people will think of the singer Mel Tillis, but Emily Blunt, you know her as the new Mary Poppins, among other things. James Earl Jones, Star Wars. We've got other people like Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee for the U.S. presidency this year. I mean, just to name a few quite famous people who have managed to overcome their stuttering and make a living in a job that requires them to speak all the time and to do it well. So I was quite impressed with that and with the determination of overcoming it. So Ezreal's book covers is another one of those nifty little bars again. But Ezreal is originally from Seattle, and he is a musician. He's always got music going on in his head. But because he was bullied by mean girls, essentially, when he was a teenager, he has an especial problem of speaking around women. He's more likely to stumble over his tongue when he's around them. He's been asked to help out with a charity that would involve providing music to poor children. The only problem is it's run by a woman. And so now his business partner, Rafe Davis, is bringing him to meet this lady that he's supposed to work with. So that's the setting for our story. Ezreal Wallach rubbed his clammy hands together as they approached the bed and breakfast. He glanced at his business partner and friend, Rafe Davis. How could he always be so calm? It wasn't fair. Ezreal's stomach had turned into a roiling mess, and he thought he might throw up. Let's sit down first. Rafe pointed to the eclectic array of comfortable rocking chairs on the wide front porch. His mother lived on the outskirts of Boone, in an historic home surrounded by a thriving garden. Grateful for any reprieve, Ezreal took a seat. The B&B was usually a safe place where no one judged him. Now he'd have to meet an unfamiliar woman here, and they expected him to talk to her. He knew it was stupid, but it felt like the old house that had been his refuge since moving to North Carolina had betrayed him. I've told you before, it'll be all right. Rafe rocked in the chair, his head against the tall back, comfortable and relaxed. It's a good thing you're doing. You'll help a lot of kids. That's right. Guilt him out. Ezreal started his own chair rocking with nervous agitation. He hated the way he always froze up around women he didn't know well and trust. His business partners had been mostly patient with him over the years because they said they understood his social phobia. It hadn't kept them from forcing him into the role of a department head at Wrecked Gaming, knowing there'd be unfamiliar women working with him. The guys were always pressing him to go beyond his comfort zone. Rafe shot him a sidelong glance like he thought Ezreal might bolt, which he just might. Actually, the more he thought about it, the more he liked the idea of walking away. They wanted him to volunteer for this. He didn't have to. In fact, he couldn't do it. What were they thinking to ask him to help this woman teach a group piano class? But Rafe was right. It was for a bunch of poor kids who couldn't afford lessons otherwise. Groaning, Ezreal shoved away the guilt again. He had so much. Even after nearly 3 years, He still couldn't get his head around the fact that he was rich. There must be some way he could use his money to help the kids and not have to talk to this woman. His money. Ezreal stopped rocking. He'd been so preoccupied with having to work with an unfamiliar woman that he hadn't been thinking clearly. Why not just hire a bunch of music students from Appalachian State? They needed part-time jobs anyway, and the class needed musicians to help with the teaching. What good was it to be a billionaire if he couldn't use the money like he wanted? It'd be a win-win. Just meet her before you decide, Rafe said. But I have the perfect solution. Ezreal explained his idea. Before Rafe could respond, a child's gleeful squeal came from behind the house, and both men stood. I can't do it. Ezreal's breathing had turned ragged. I have to go. Before he could move, a little girl ran around the corner of the house, her pale hair streaming behind her as she ran from Rafe's younger sister, Lessa. The new child's laughter rang through the yard like a flute solo. The soft breeze rustling through the trees and the monster-like growling noises that came from Lessa, adding to the orchestral depth. Ezreal wished he were sitting at his computer to capture the music they were making. When the blonde girl became aware of the two men, she stopped abruptly. Lessa nearly plowed into her. Then she saw her big brother. Rafe! She flew up the stairs and threw herself into his arms for a hug, and then did the same to Ezreal. Who's this? Rafe nodded toward her friend. Jana, don't you like her name? I do. When I'm a mama and have a little girl, I'm going to name her Jana. Lessa put a hand on each man's arm and said to her friend, This is my big brother. Remember me telling you about him? And this here's Ezreal. We call him Ez. He's like an uncle because he's like Rafe's brother, even if Rafe's my brother and not my uncle. Lessa frowned, as though her train of thought had confused her. Nice to meet you, Jana, Rafe said. Are you in Lessa's class at school? The little girl nodded and stayed where she was. Ezreal sensed the child's wariness. He knew that feeling all too well himself. She'd either experienced something bad in her life, or someone close to her had warned her about being cautious. For her to be so leery, she'd have had to hear it often. The music of her laughter lingered in his mind, and it saddened him that it had shut down as soon as she'd come upon the men. Was it because they were strangers? Or because they were men? The hair on the back of Ezreal's neck stood up, and he clenched his fists. If someone had hurt this child... He took a slow breath and calmed himself. No need to jump to conclusions, just because he'd been bullied as a child. To avoid towering over her, he eased back in the rocking chair and signaled for Rafe to do the same. He did, and pulled Lessa to his side. Hello, Ezreal said, his voice soft. Are you in kindergarten too? Jana nodded. Do you like it? She nodded again, but said nothing. It's been a long time since I was in kindergarten. I remember that my favorite thing was the chocolate milk. Ezreal grinned happily and rubbed his stomach. I think it's probably still my favorite drink. It is, Lessa cried. Mom makes sure to have chocolate milk with Sunday dinner every week just for you. Does she really? He glanced at her in surprise. You know Ma. Rafe shot him a knowing grin. She aims to please. I like chocolate milk too, came a soft voice from the bottom of the porch steps. I see you have good taste. Ezreal slowly started rocking his chair. What else do you like about kindergarten? I like coloring, Lessa piped up. I like recess. Jana moved to the first step. Because you get to go outside? Ezreal asked. Yes, I like it better than being inside. It's stuffy there. But you like to color too, Lessa added. Ezreal glanced at Rafe's little sister, appreciative that she seemed to understand how skittish her friend was. Did Lessa know why the girl was so nervous? I like music time better. Mama does too. Jana watched Ezreal. The color of his eyes tugged at a memory. The pale gray irises were surrounded by a dark blue. Where had he seen eyes like that before? "Are you going to help with Mama's class?" Jana asked. Ezreal stopped rocking for a second, confused. And then it hit him. This child was the music teacher's daughter. His stomach knotted and his heart started to pound again. He took a deep breath, preparing to tell her that he couldn't help. Does she still need helpers? That hadn't come out right. Ezreal's hand shook as it gripped the arms of the rocker. Jana nodded. She looked like she wanted to say something else, but glanced first at Rafe and Lessa, and then around the yard as though there might be someone there spying on them. Ezreal couldn't help scanning the area too. What was the child afraid of? Who was she afraid of? When the little girl took the final step, he looked at her. She now stood a few inches from his knees, gazing at him with those intense gray eyes. He didn't move. "Mama says not just anyone can come to our house," Jana finally said, her voice so soft it came out as a whisper. "We have to be careful." And that's the end of today's reading. I hope you have a good weekend. Thank you.